We're looking at Lady Macbeth in Act 1 and how Shakespeare presents her. The first thing we've got to look at is how she's presented in Act 1, Scene 5 when we first meet her. She receives a letter from Macbeth, from her husband, telling her about the witches and about what they've said to him, what they've suggested about his future, about him becoming king one day. And she reads the letter to us. Straight after that, her response is to echo the witch's words, and she does so later in the scene as well when she first greets Macbeth, when they first meet up physically. She says, "Great Glamis, worthy Cawdor, greater than both by the all hail hereafter." So her first words in the play after the letter and her first words when she greets her husband seems to be repeating the very prophecies, the very greetings that the witches used when they first met Macbeth. In that sense, in terms of her echoing those words, it ties in with the idea of Shakespeare presenting her as evil, as being like a fourth witch to some extent. She also seeks to very much influence and control Macbeth. And if you think about it, that's what the witches were planning to do. Think about Act 1, Scene 1, the very beginning of the play, how it starts off. When shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won, where the place upon the heath, there to meet with Macbeth. That's what they're planning to do, the witches. They're planning to meet with Macbeth and to influence him and control him and steer him towards murdering Duncan. Lady Macbeth seeks to do exactly the same thing. So as soon as she receives the letter, she is talking to herself, but kind of imagining she's talking to her husband, and she says, "Hie thee hither," which means hurry up and come here, come back home. "Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirit in thine ear." What she fears is that Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness, she says. You're too kind, you're too gentle, caring, loving, genuine, pure. You're too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way, is what she says. You know, you maybe you want to be king, maybe you have some ambition, but you're not prepared to become king in the quickest, easiest way possible, which of course is murdering Duncan. So she fears that he's too kind, he's too good, he's too pure, too righteous to be able to commit the murder that she feels is necessary. So she says, "Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear." What a sinister, evil image, the idea of pouring your spirits into someone's ear, like as if you're pouring evil intent, you're pouring poison into their ear. She very much comes across as one of the witches in that sense when she says that line, doesn't she? She also, obviously, in this section in Act 1, Scene 5, she asks to be possessed. She says, "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty." She's asked to be filled from head to toe, from the crown to the toe, full of evil, full of direst cruelty. If we're thinking about the way that the audience at the time would have responded to this, they would have been unbelievably shocked by the idea of someone standing there on the stage in front of them asking to be possessed by evil spirits. But that's what she's asking. But, you know, in terms of how she's being portrayed at this point, she's just as evil as one of the witches. In terms of the audience response, she's very much being presented as evil and witch-like. And it could tie in with the way that Malcolm, remember, at the end of the play, describes her as a fiend-like queen. And, you know, very much that's the way that we're seeing her at this moment, at least. She rejects typically feminine characteristics. You could look at this lots of ways, but one of the things I think to look at is the milk imagery that's used here. She's already criticised Macbeth for being too full of the milk of human kindness, but she also says, she asks these evil spirits to take her milk for gall. So as a woman, what she's saying is that I have milk in my breasts. I have, you know, good, nurturing liquid in my breasts that I could feed a baby with. Okay, come and take that and replace it with gall. Replace it with a bitter, poisonous, acidic liquid. Okay, to replace anything within me that is milk-like, that is tender and nurturing and loving, and replace it with something evil and poisonous and acidic and bitter. Okay, so the milk imagery here is quite interesting and very much emphasizes the idea of her trying to reject the feminine, reject typically feminine characteristics, and she tries to embrace evil and ruthlessness, I suppose, in this scene. Later on in the scene, she is very much presented as duplicitous, and she asks Macbeth to be duplicitous too. Duplicitous just means two-faced. She looks at him and says, "Your face, my Thane, is as a book where men may read strange matters. Stop showing what you're thinking on your face. I can read what you're thinking. I can look in your eyes, look in your face, and I know exactly what's going on in your head. You've got to stop that. You've got to start putting on a face, an image, a facade that kind of doesn't reveal what you're genuinely thinking. Because if we're going to go ahead and murder Duncan, okay, you need to look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. You need to look completely innocent and pure and welcoming when he comes here tonight. Okay, you've got to be his loyal subject and his welcoming host, but underneath it, you've got to be a serpent, which obviously links back to the idea of the serpent representing Satan or the devil in the Garden of Eden in Genesis and the Bible. So she's saying, look completely innocent on the surface. If anyone looked at your face, they would think that you were just honoured that you were receiving Duncan into your house, into your castle tonight. But underneath it, be evil and serpent-like, and be plotting his murder. And of course, that's what she does. So Act 1, Scene 6 is interesting in terms of the way that she then speaks when she receives Duncan. So we can very much look at her duplicitous nature at this point. It's a very formally constructed speech. You get the impression she's practiced it, and she's sounding very formal and welcoming, as you would expect a subject to talk to their king. Okay, so she says, "All our service in every point twice done and then done double were poor and single business to contend against those honours deep and broad wherewith your majesty loads our house." Look at what she says there. What she's saying is that all the things that we've done, all our service, okay, so all the things that we've done in preparing for you to come here tonight, the preparing the food and preparing the rooms and tidying the place up, and all the preparations that we've made, all our service, if we did it twice, okay, so if we did all the things that we've done, and my goodness, we've done a lot, okay, to prepare for you to come here tonight, your majesty, if we did it twice and then we doubled it again, okay, then it still wouldn't be enough to match the honour of us receiving you in our castle. That's how honoured we are at the idea of receiving you here as your hosts. Okay, so she's very much going over the top, isn't she, in terms of emphasizing how she and her husband feel to receive Duncan. What an honor it is. She goes on to say, "For those of old and the late dignities heaped up to them, we rest your hermits." Now, hermits would have been, religious people who would have travelled around with an important person, maybe a king, and their job would have been to pray for the king, or pray for the noble person. And so a hermit would have been your personal prayer, if you like, your personal religious person that would have been completely, utterly devoted 24 hours a day to following you wherever you went around the country and staying with you. And that's all they would do, is they would pray for you. So all day, every day, that would be their job. And so what Lady Macbeth is saying is that's how we feel towards you, your majesty. We are prepared to completely, utterly devote every single minute of our day, our lives, to praying for you, because we hold you in such high esteem. We are your hermits. We are your personal prayers, if you like. So that's what the hermit reference is about there. I think it's also quite interesting to look at the language that she's using, and I've only just noticed this time, having read and seen Macbeth lots of times. I've only just noticed this time, and I just wonder whether this is a deliberate attempt on Shakespeare's part to foreshadow the witches' words later in the play. So when the witches are talking later, one of the famous lines from the play, this is in Act 4, Scene 1, when the witches are chanting their spells, and they say, "Double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn and cauldron bubble." And because it's such a famous line, I know we haven't had that line yet, but I wonder whether Shakespeare is kind of foreshadowing it, because if you look at Duncan's last line, okay, he says, and thank us for, this is in Act 1, Scene 6, okay, about line kind of 14, okay, and Duncan says, and thank us for your trouble. And then Lady Macbeth says, all our service in every point twice done, and then done double. And that rhyming with trouble and double, it just seems to me that that's exact, particularly with the done double, and then using the witches, then using that word double, double, toil and trouble. There does seem to be a sense in which, the witches are kind of echoing later Lady Macbeth's words and sort of manipulating and using them. And I wonder whether Shakespeare is just foreshadowing what the witches are going to say later. Is it just a little link again between Lady Macbeth's words and the witches' words, suggesting that we're very much meant to see them as one? They're acting in unison, that Shakespeare is kind of aligning Lady Macbeth with the witches. They're almost one and the same, because if you look at their speech, it often echoes and foreshadows and reflects the speech of the other. Okay, the main point here from Act 1, Scene 6, though, is that she's pretending to be this welcoming, devoted and subservient hostess, quite sort of obsequious in the way that she's sucking up to Duncan, but actually she's secretly plotting his murder. She's just said to her husband, the raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under our battlements tonight. She's very much plotting the fact that this is going to be his last night. She says, never shall sun that morrow see. He's not going to wake up and see the sunrise tomorrow morning. Okay. And yet when she greets him, it's like, it's such a pleasure to have you here, Your Majesty. Finally, then, Act 1, Scene 7 is such an important scene. And so when we're writing about this bit, we need to, I think if we're focusing on Lady Macbeth, we need to look at how she persuades Macbeth to go ahead with the murder. Macbeth we've just had there's a long soliloquy. A soliloquy, remember, is just a speech where an actor is speaking on their own on the stage and they're revealing their thoughts to the audience. We get a long soliloquy from Macbeth at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 7, where he's weighing up the pros and cons of murdering Duncan. He's from lots of different perspectives. He's trying to decide whether or not he should go ahead and commit this act of regicide. He finally then, when he talks to Lady Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 7, about line 30-ish, okay, Macbeth says this. He says, we will proceed no further in this business. Okay, that's his decision. He's decided, we will proceed no further in this business. We're not going to do it. We're not going to go ahead with it. Okay. By the end of the scene, he says this, I am settled and bend up each corporal agent to this terrible feat. That's it. We're going to go ahead with it. I'm definitely doing it. Now, what on earth makes him change his mind in those intervening, what is it, kind of like about 40 lines? How does he go from saying, we are definitely not going to go ahead with this, we're definitely not going to murder the king, to by the end of the scene saying, that's it, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it. I'm settled to bend up each corporal agent to this terrible feat. Well, let's have a look at it. The first thing is that Lady Macbeth recognises Macbeth's tragic flaw. The play, Macbeth, is a tragedy, which means that Macbeth is the tragic hero, and what we see is his downfall due to a number of factors, but mainly because of his tragic flaw, or his tragic flaws, and that just means his weaknesses, the things that cause him to stuff things up, the things that cause his downfall, ultimately, of course, leading to his death. And Macbeth's main tragic flaw is his ambition, or I prefer to kind of think of it as his obsession with how others see him, his reputation. He has to think that other people think highly of him and recognize his status and think he's amazing. Okay, look at what he says in terms of the reason that he gives for not going ahead with murdering Duncan. He says this. This is Act 1, Scene 7, line 30-31. He says, we will proceed no further in this business. He hath honoured me of late, meaning he's made me Thane of Cawdor. He's honoured me. He's rewarded me for my prowess and my efforts on the battlefield. Okay, and I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon. I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people. What he wants to do is he wants to revel in and wallow in and appreciate for all it's worth this moment where he's the hero. He's just won the battle for the king. He's the hero of Scotland. He's the man of the hour. He's just saved Scotland from the Norwegians and from the traitors. And Duncan thinks he's amazing and everyone thinks he's amazing. Why jeopardize that? Okay, is what he says. I don't want to ruin that. Everyone thinks I'm number one at the moment. Everyone has golden opinions about me. Okay, now Lady Macbeth realizes that. She recognizes that if she's going to get Macbeth to commit this act, that's what she's got to tap into, the way that other people perceive him. And if she can persuade him that she and others will not think as highly of him if he doesn't go ahead with the murder, okay, then she can get him to do it. If she can get him to think, everyone will think and she will think in particular, that he's a coward, that he's not a man, that he hasn't got what it takes if he doesn't go ahead with this, okay, she'll get him to do it. And that's exactly what she does. So if you look at Act 1, Scene 7, she says things like this. Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since? Awakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? From this time such I account thy love. You say you love me? Well, you obviously don't if you're not prepared to go ahead with this. Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Are you afraid? Are you afraid to actually, put your money where your mouth is? Okay. Wouldst thou have that which thou esteemest the ornament of life, and live a coward in thine own esteem? Let I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat in the adage. The cat in the adage, an adage is like a little sort of saying, a little story. And what she means is that what this story is about is like a cat who's got like a little puddle, a pool in front of it with some fish in, and the cat desperately wants the fish, but isn't prepared to get its paws wet to get one. Okay, and she's saying, Macbeth, you're just like that scaredy cat. You're just like the cat that wants the fish, but isn't prepared to get its paws wet to get what it takes, to get what it wants. And so she's saying, that's just like you, isn't it? You want to be king, you want to be number one, but you're not prepared to do what it takes. You're not prepared to get your hands dirty. You're not prepared to get blood on your hands. You just haven't got the guts, have you? So she accuses him of not being a man, of being a coward, of being afraid, of not having, the determination and the ruthlessness and the courage to go ahead and act to achieve his ambitions, basically. Look at the way she speaks. There are lots of exclamations there, lots of rhetorical questions, aren't there, in Act 1, Scene 7? So it's packed with kind of rhetorical devices, persuasive language. She uses very emotive language, doesn't she? And in particular, there's a really shocking bit where she emotionally manipulates him into going ahead with it. And she says this. This is about line 54. She says, I have given suck, meaning I've breastfed. I have given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. Now that's quite an interesting line there. Okay, she says, I have given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. Now we need to be careful not to read too much into this, because Shakespeare doesn't actually specifically refer to Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as having children or having had children. This is the only real reference we get. But he refers to Duncan's children, Malcolm and Donalbain. He refers to Banquo's children, Fleance. He refers to the Macduff's children. So lots of children are referred to. This is the only reference we get, and yet Macbeth actually says that he doesn't have children, or suggests he doesn't, because the implication is that once he becomes king, after he dies, it will be Banquo's children who succeed him. And so there's no mention of them actually having any living children, and yet Lady Macbeth says, I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. There is a suggestion, it's no more than that, we need to be a little bit tentative in terms of how we express this, but there is a suggestion that perhaps she has had children, but lost them. That they have had children, and they've died, maybe quite young. Okay. Now, if that is the case, that's a really emotional thing to raise at this point, isn't it? You know, to use the image of their dead baby to get at Macbeth at this point. Because look at what she says. She says, I have given suck and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. Let's have a look at that bit again. She says, I have given suck and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. She's saying, if I'd sworn to go ahead with murdering Duncan like you have, I would rather take my baby while I'm breastfeeding it and it's looking up, smiling at me while I'm feeding it. I would rather snatch it from my breast and dash its brains out than go against my word, against my promise. Now, that's a shocking enough image as it is, isn't it? Okay. But think how potentially even more shocking it is if it's alluding to, if it's maybe referring to a child that they had that they've now lost. Yeah? And so in terms of her emotionally manipulating Macbeth, she's throwing everything at it, isn't she? She's not holding anything back. It's so powerful, the imagery that she's using here, isn't it? I suppose the other thing that's interesting is that she says, had I so sworn as you have done to this? Well, actually, I mean, I know that as an audience, we're not necessarily party to every conversation that these two characters have had, but he hasn't sworn to this. Okay, he hasn't on the stage said, we will go ahead, we are going to murder Duncan. He's written a letter saying what the witches told him. When they actually had a conversation when he returns to the castle, he says, we will speak further, you know, we'll talk about this later. And then the next thing he says is, we will proceed no further in this business. So the only thing he said is he's told her what the witches have said. He said, we will speak further, meaning we'll just talk about this later at some other time. And we will proceed no further in this business. We're not going to go ahead with it. As far as I, can see, at no point does he say, I swear we will do this. He doesn't even say we will. Okay. And yet Lady Macbeth says, if I'd sworn like you have done to this, okay, really clever emotional manipulation. She's making him think that he's promised to do it, when actually the suggestion is that he hasn't at all. What she does have, though, is a concrete plan. So if you look towards the end of Act 1, Scene 7, then she's got this plan to get the guards, the chamberlains, the guards in his bedroom, to get them drunk, and make it look as if they have done it, that they've committed the murder. And obviously because they're drunk, they can, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth then would be able to do whatever they wanted to on the unguarded Duncan. So she's got a concrete plan for it, and that's one of the things actually that Macbeth is concerned about. Would they actually get away with it? Okay, and so when she comes up with a concrete plan, again, that's a significant moment in her influencing him to go ahead with the murder. The other thing that she does, finally here, is if you look at Act 1, Scene 7 there, just look at how much Lady Macbeth speaks and how little Macbeth speaks in their conversation there in the space of those kind of 40-odd lines. She talks and talks and talks and talks and talks, doesn't she? And she hardly lets him get a word in. So from her saying, was the Hope drunk, he gets, sort of 2.5 lines in for a bit, and then she interrupts him. Okay, you can actually tell that she's interrupting him as well, because he doesn't even get to finish his lines. Typically you'd expect, because they're speaking in iambic pentameter, but you'd expect there to be 10 syllables per line. If you look at it, when Macbeth says, "Who dares do more is none," then Lady Macbeth, this is on about line 47, finishes the line, doesn't she? What beast was it then? And then again, when Macbeth tries to interrupt and say, "If we should fail," she finishes the line by saying, "We fail." Yeah, so she doesn't even let him finish lines, let alone really speak. And she dominates the conversation. She doesn't want to let him speak or think. She's determined to talk until she's persuaded him. And then she'll let him speak, because she knows that if she lets him speak before that, he might persuade himself out of it. She's determined to keep talking until she's convinced him. So again, we can look at her as a manipulative influence here. She's kind of like an evil temptress kind of figure, just like one of the witches, in terms of her role in influencing Macbeth to go ahead and commit this unnatural act of regicide, the killing of the king.